pleasure to introduce our speaker, David Teachout, who, if you have not been here before, I will now describe to you. He is a mental health therapist and photographer focused on and teaching how creativity intersects with mental flexibility. David grew up as a Christian fundamentalist, attending a Bible college and receiving a bachelor's in theology and psychology. During his studies, David deconverted and has been on a journey of appreciating humanity and all the stories we create to build meaning and purpose. He has a master's in both forensic psychology and counseling psychology and is currently at work on a doctorate in clinical psychology. He's a real big nerd. And he has been actively working within the field of psychology as a therapist, social worker, advocate, and subject matter expert for over 15 years. In his spare time, David enjoys reading a copious amount, both fiction and nonfiction. Follow him on Goodreads, exploring perspective through photography, and maintains a blog at www.lifeweavings.com and a podcast at humanitiesvalues.com. And I'll drop those in the chat too. And so, David, welcome to the show. How are you doing? Have we embarrassed you enough yet?
I mean, a little. I will now be referring to myself as Dr. Treacherous, though.
Yeah.
So it is a requirement.
Yeah.
I like that.
I like it. I'm getting like a black lab coat vibe.
Yeah. I mean, or RBN. It's not quite as good as RBG, but RBN. Real big nerd. It works.
I can see it. We can make this a thing.
Yeah.
We need t-shirts.
Hats
y'all.
and t-shirts. T-shirts will be happening.
Well, excursion time, we're gonna have to have everybody's gonna have to have their t-shirts. It's gonna be a thing, y'all.
Yes. Don't forget to sign up for the excursion.
When that happens, we'll announce it and then you can be 40% cooler because you'll be hanging out with all of us.
Oh, it's like additive. Yeah.
Yeah, it accumulates.
Yes. All right, we're gonna stop now. David, let us stop making jokes at our own expense and welcome you. What have you been up to lately? Tell us everything. What's going on with you?
Oh, really, really busy. I got back into, I took a job for a little while thinking, hey, insurance is good. No, I like being my own boss. So went back to full-time therapy and am now already up to like 34 hours a week. It seemed appropriate then to talk about therapy this evening. So, because I'm doing so much of it. And in particular, like RfR's therapy project and some things to, take a look at when, looking at it for a therapist. And when you already have one, what's the purpose of therapy? Small caveat, obviously, these are all going to be, funneled through my vision. So there are plenty of contrary, opinions out there on this. So just saying, this is my own, perhaps not so humble opinion. So, it is what it is. Yeah.
That's all right. And, speaking of which, we normally talk a little bit about the Secular Therapy Project in the introduction to the show, but not wanting to steal your thunder, we did not. Do you want to?
Honest we are.
Yeah.
I mean, thankfully, I got the talking points updated from Darrel, because I guess the Secular Therapy Project has increased over the last few years. We're now, I guess, in 9 countries, 45 states, and we have 721 approved therapists. This was as of a few weeks ago. For all I know, this might actually be, more now. And well over 32,000 registered clients, which is amazing. Will note, we can always, so if you are, a therapist who is listening or watching now or later, by all means, reach out, because we can definitely use more. And I mean, that 721 is incredible. It absolutely is.
726 now.
726. I am updating my facts in real time.
See,
right.
And that's what we do here. We get excited about being wrong, because that means now we know something
I
new.
am wrong fairly often.
And we get excited about facts.
There is that. Yeah. So yes, 726 is a fabulous number. Getting it up to 1,000 would be incredible. Ooh,
729.
729 as of today. Oh man, we are practically growing as we speak. By the end of my presentation, we will have 800.
Yes.
Probably not, but
maybe not that many,
really
but
cool.
You don't know.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going on behind the scenes.
It's possible. Could be, yeah. So,
and so, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
But yes, absolutely. Anybody reaching out, part of it is, the large part about this therapy project is, and this is part of why, the first question in the poll was asked around so many, way too many people who need help, who need that listening ear, who need that safe space to be able to reflect on what's going on in their life and get that support. Or unfortunately being, encountering those who, as far as I'm concerned, violate ethics, but that's a whole other discussion, and attempt to, put forward their own religious, often without being asked, ideology on their clients. And this often happens, again, without being asked, and often without any kind of lead up in the sense of, advertising yourself as a fill in the blank religion therapist. They are out there. Heck, years ago, I thought I was going to be one, but that didn't turn out. So, it's like, you can advertise that way. Fine and dandy. Great. People know what they're getting into. It's awesome. But, unless other than that, though, when you're encountering this inside a session, literally being told, let's consult the Bible. Maybe you should pray more. How about you come to my church? That violates so many ethics. I don't even want to talk. It's just insane. But, I've heard it. Literally, I've had clients who have shared stories similar, to that. And there's plenty of research out there that shows the, negative effects of what that does to people who are searching. So, psychotherapy project started about 10 years ago, and around 2012. So we're getting where 11 so years ago, and in order to address that need, basically saying, you are a secular therapist, you are here to not portray put forward your own kind of fundamentalist ideology. You are here to support people as they are in their full humanity. This is, everybody is looked through and vetted. Not everybody becomes one. Just because you put in a application does not mean you're going to get in. We actually turned down around 30% of applicants, which would seem high, but I actually consider that a positive because it really means the dedication of the organization and for this project to make sure that people are operating from evidence-based practices and are dedicated to that mission of secularity and non-indoctrination. So that's a positive. And so, but of course, as always, you've already mentioned, I believe you mentioned the helpline. So that is also, a possibility. Thank you for putting up the seculartherapy.org site. And of course, the helpline is always there, for if you need immediate support. By all means, you can go to the secular therapy site, look up your state, see who is registered, and get help. So.
I was thinking before we get into the main talk, since everybody's been answering the poll. Do you want to go over the poll questions before we go into the main talk? I think that would be a good starting point to get us on the right track.
The poll is awesome.
All right. I will share the results of the poll, and I will read the results aloud as well for those of you who are listening. So again, the questions were, the first one was, have you encountered a therapy situation where you felt the therapist was pushing a religious or ideological agenda that you didn't ask about? 33% of respondents said yes. That's high.
That is high.
And 57% said no. 5%, even more alarming, said yes, and they didn't stop when I asked. And 5% said, doesn't every therapist have an agenda? So Okay.
Wow.
Yeah,
we'll touch
that's
on that
high.
last option.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Question number 2 was, should therapy be concerned with healing? 33% said, yes, I'm broken and need fixing. Wow. 0% said, no, my mind isn't like a broken bone. Ooh, these are interesting results. I was expecting different answers here. I like this. This is fascinating. 52% said, yes, it's a nice metaphor. Yeah, the person who calls other people real big nerds says fascinating about data points. And 14% said no, thinking that way leads to the therapist thinking there's some kind of guru.
Well, I mean, Cara, we do get excited about facts. Like random data and facts. We're like, ooh,
the data. Yes, it's exciting. It's exciting to know things.
We have interesting fetishes on the show.
Yes, we do. And we don't shame here.
We don't shame. No.
Yes. We talked about this in the pre-chat. Okay, and finally, who is your favorite on-screen therapist? Wow, Frasier pulled ahead with 43%, y'all. Wow. Okay, 10% said Linda Martin from Lucifer. Another 10% said Paul Weston from In Treatment. Another 10% said Valerie Kinbot from Wednesday, and 29% selected my personal favorite, Hannibal Lecter, minus the drugging and eating you part. That is a key caveat.
He's my senpai.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a lot of information there. Thoughts, David?
As it noted, Kelsey Grammer, is a bit of a dick. But I like to think of Frasier as like the ideal version that he could be, so, in an alternate universe, he actually was his character and was good. Actually, I'm floored by the Frasier winning here because now I know the entertainment proclivities and likely age bracket of many of the people here.
Also, there could have been an accidental effect I introduced, which is why you should never introduce your own opinions while you're reading poll questions to people. But I did mention that Hannibal Lecter was winning at first, and that may have encouraged people to select a different answer. So that I could have skewed the results.
Well, that's what happens when you enter your bias, Cara.
I did. Objectivity is a myth.
Yep.
I did. So I added the minus the drugging and eating because of Mads Mikkelsen's portrayal, where he utilized drugs in order to facilitate, personal growth. That's not ethical. Just no.
Don't. No, like you can think Mads Mikkelsen is a very, very pretty man and an amazing actor and entertainer. Yeah. And if he was your therapist, maybe, but he also will kill people and eat them. But he's a very good chef as well. So.
He will give you an amazing meal out of them. So,
someone that makes him
Lady Justice is,
he gets mad at rude. He doesn't like rude people, and rude people need to die.
Yes. Also, if you have not seen In Treatment, it's an excellent show. It's a little older. I think it's 15 years or so, maybe less. But it really is. And Gabriel Byrne is, speaking of pretty people, he's just absolutely delightful. And it's actually a decent portrayal for the most part. More so in the first season than the second one. But yeah. So thank you for filling it out. That's fun. We will definitely touch on the Every Therapist Has an Agenda piece. And the second one, like Cara, wow, I was definitely surprised by this. Yeah, to each their own. I'm a little curious. Maybe people can comment if they want, by all means, or you can hang out in the Q&A afterwards. I'll hang out for a little while, but I'm wondering if the proclivity towards thinking of oneself as broken is a holdover from, certain fundamentalist dogmas. So it's actually a metaphor that I almost never use, and in part because of that allusion to sin and so on. But this isn't to say it's a wrong. It's just taking a look at how we talk about ourselves is important. So, but no, thank you for sharing.
Yeah. Okay. So I will stop sharing that now. And yeah, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about kind of what you think of as the purpose of therapy or the goal of therapy or the place of healing in therapy. But I wonder if that might be a good place to kind of start the conversation.
Yeah, because
no,
I'm very
absolutely.
because also me and Carve discussed this. Your title is very interesting. So if you can go into that while you're having this discussion, it would be, just like a good jumping off points.
Yeah, it's I had fun with the title. Largely because one, I mean, this is about psychotherapy project, or at least initially, and then moving on. But as well, it's a kind of poke at the portrayal that a lot of therapists consider themselves. Both historically, there was a kind of time of the therapist was a like, it's not quite guru, but a almost secular priest. It was really that you could do no wrong. Often portrayed in this very ivory tower esoteric, like, oh, the secrets that are found and explored in therapy, and the complex processes of the mind, and that kind of got away for a while. And I think Irvin Yalom, amongst others, for that kind of humanizing therapists, and you can see this in entertainment, and how therapists are portrayed over time. But then recently there seems to be another uptick where therapists often think of themselves as proselytizers, political persuasions of all over the map. I mean, really, it's all over. This isn't isolating anybody in particular, but it's almost if you're not doing the work unless you are in your role as therapist undermining whatever you happen to feel is a problem in society. I find that profoundly unhelpful and disturbing, unfortunately. But that it's kind of ramp back up again. And so which is why in the first question I posed it as religious and ideological, because it is not just a religious proclivity, it is an ideological one, which kind of goes, conversion therapists, it's not just religious people in the past who were doing conversion therapy. It was people who didn't either at the time. Same thing these days with everything going on all over the place. So the idea here is that the therapeutic relationship is supposed to be professional. I had one professor explain it to me as well as you are friendly, but not friends. There's a kind of, I know there was a question in the first George Bush, it was George Bush Jr., about polling, where it was like, which candidate would you like to have a beer with? And oddly enough, George Bush won that poll and won the presidency. What that says about the constituency, I'm not going to speculate, but it's not good. Same thing when it comes to therapists. Yes, in theory, many therapists and clients and vice versa. I mean, it's why we continually have to go through ethics as professionals, is to remind ourselves of boundaries and how these are maintained. But you might encounter somebody like, wow, if we just only knew each other in a different setting, we could totally get a beer or hang out or whatever. Always cautioning when that feeling comes up, because we are I'm not going to say we're fake, not that, but we are trained to create rapport and listen attentively. And let's face it, most people are not great at it. And so it is quite the, can be almost emotionally intoxicating. And it's why it can be helpful as well. It's a good space because you're being heard and being seen. And that's what people want. And that's what people often need. But at the same token, it doesn't mean that we're always that outside. And the nature of the connection that's being formed is through that lens of entering that space. And so just to be careful around when you start feeling like, oh, wow, I totally want to go get a beer with my therapist. And if the therapist is encouraging that, probably a good idea to find somebody else. So yeah, there are some really good questions so far coming in. And yes, we will get to them.
Yes, we're collecting those. Don't worry.
We're collecting, yeah.
Yeah, we're collecting.
Sometimes I may break apart and address one if it's quick, but yeah, these are not quick so far. So awesome. Thank you for keeping
Her and
those.
I are the curators of questions. So we will create a smorgasbord of questions for you to feast upon, David.
It is often. It's awesome. Yeah. All right. Buffet
of questions. I just made it sound kind of sexual, which was not the intention. Or maybe it was. So, it is me.
I mean, so professional, friendly, not friendly, or friendly, not friends, and change oriented. So this goes into worldview, and part of the first question around agenda. Don't all therapists have an agenda? Well, it kind of depends on what you mean by that, of course, which is what I often come back to when it comes to language. But in a sense, yes. I mean, anybody who's saying that therapists shouldn't have any opinions, they're either lying or they're just bullshitting you and trying to sell their product, because it's just not true. Yeah, we're human beings, and so we have opinions, obviously. Part of the role of a good therapist is to keep those opinions isolated, and in many ways use them as tools if it's for the betterment, perceived benefit of the client or patient, depending on what term you use. Often depends on the setting, but but there it is. Like opinion, we're not here to just vomit our worldview to you. At the same token, though, obviously we are all coming from a perspective. Everybody does. Here's the problem, though. I actually got a little bit into trouble in my graduate degree around this, because was kept poking at the professors around, well, what about worldviews? What about philosophy? Don't all these interventions have underlying assumptions? So if we start using one, like, can we, might they contradict? I mean, free association from psychodynamic theory is based on certain assumptions of mind and relationship that contradict completely some of the intervention and philosophy undergirding it from, say, cognitive behavioral therapy and so on. I mean, so unfortunately, studying philosophy, studying worldviews like that are not often the case in most programs. So many therapists kind of stumble into, a vague idea of what it is that they're thinking and espousing. And as a consequence, aren't, 100% certain about what's going on. And then on top of that, as, patients or clients, you show up and you're like, wait a minute, does this person think this, or how does this work? And it can get a little confusing at times. It's not that good work can't be done. But.
Well, like I remember when I was going through school and doing my psychology courses, and I took a couple of philosophy courses at the same time. Mm-hmm. And there can be this cross-referential that happens when you're taking both that information in. And I'm sure as you go upper level and you try to suss that stuff out, as you move into a more specialized idea of what kind of therapy you want to do and, all these different modalities. But I'm sure there's sometimes that stuff can seep its way in into a psychological framework, especially for people that want to go into a more clinical treatment, based program that they have to be aware of.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, so part of it, in the nature of what the therapeutic relationship is, actually addresses the question that just popped up, and about how can you tell if you're too reliant. And part of it's a little along the lines of codependency. I actually think that codependency is a natural state, because we are inherently social creatures, but there are healthy versions of codependency and there are unhealthy versions of codependency. And obviously there are probably different ways of framing that. I like framing it that way because it irks people. So, just is. But so codependency essentially is just, there's usually what is meant by codependency is an unhealthy reliance to the detriment of oneself and, your ability to move forward in one or more areas of your life that are contingent upon somebody else. So my version of codependency is a very generic, like, we're all connected. I mean, literally anybody try thinking about some form of yourself that is 100% disconnected from any relationship with something or someone else. We can't. I mean, it's like, even if you're going to get snarky, like some teenagers that get back to me when I ask that question, like, what about empty space? It's like, well, you're still defining yourself through what you are not, i.e. the empty space. So we are we are embedded creatures in this reality. We are not, as some religious dogmas would say it, somehow like superveniently created and apart from nature. We are quite the opposite. We're embedded. Our fundamental building blocks are the same fundamental building blocks chemically as the rest of nature and in animals. So there is nothing about us that is so unique that we are somehow cut off from the rest of the natural world. And a good thing too, because that means we can work together, ideally. We can explore questions together and ponder how we get better in living personally and societally, because we are fundamentally based around the same reality. We're embedded in the same one. So it's a good thing that we are not cut off. So, coming back a little bit then to the too reliant, I will say that one of my opening spiels, just personal, is that one, I am not interested in becoming anybody's guru, just not. If often my clients are 8 to 12 sessions, 6 to 12 or so, because point is to help teach principles, how to then apply them to your own life so that you don't really feel the need to talk to me very often, if ever. Most of my clients are like every month, sometimes every quarter. I got, a few people who show up like every several months. I mean, it's whenever is needed. And so, in that I consider a success. It's a terrible business model. But I consider it a success because there is no point, no matter how long we talk, that I am going to ever know enough and therefore be arrogant enough to tell you what to do. So learning how and finding that support to then move on with your life, absolutely do that. If a therapist is, gleefully, stating that they're so happy that they've been seeing most of their caseload for like the last 5 to 10 years, no joke, heard that more than once. I consider that a failure, quite frankly. I understand that sounds a little, and it's not that. Some circumstances, it is a good support. Sometimes structurally, people do not have the support, and so it can be useful, it can be helpful. So it's not a blanket statement. But at the same token, they're so rare that if you're also not being helped in developing your own resources where possible, then yeah, that's kind of a problem. You should be encouraged to develop your own resources outside of the therapeutic relationship. It should be a help for independence.
I found when I was in therapy, I've been in now therapy for 30 years now. So, I've been at this a while anyway, but what's always helped me is that usually a therapist is like a guide and helps you explore like if you're going to make a choice, they help you explore the options and help you think through potential outcomes that you may not be considering. They never tell you what to do, but they will say like, hey, based on your past history, how do you think this is going to go? And help you work through things that because if you've worked with them a while, they've gotten to know you and the things that you're working on. And if there's something you're facing, they'll be like, okay, let's look at this. And how can we, based on previous patterns, maybe we can do this in a more healthy way. Let's talk about those options. And those have always been the most beneficial relationships. They never told me what to do, but let me help you walk through what might be a good decision for you to make.
Well, and this is where, I don't describe myself as, generically speaking, an affirmative therapist in the sense that I'm sitting there going, you know what, you're absolutely right all the time. Every thought that crosses your mind is completely accurate. And yes, in fact, everybody is out to get you. I mean, no, of course not. Like, I mean, if the client or patient was in full, easily met access to all the truth, then frankly, I'd be reversing the relationship and asking them questions. I mean, that's just it. Like, nobody comes in thinking, hey, I've got it all figured out. Actually, if you do think you've got it all figured out, there's a diagnosis for that. But, that's not, we are not here to either one, kind of promote actively our own worldview, although obviously it will be part of it. We're about to get into that in a bit. But two, we're not also there either to just kind of blanketly declare that, your view of everything is 100% accurate and viable. If it was, then you wouldn't need to talk with us. So there is that give and take. There is that, line to walk professionally. And sometimes you can find yourself going on one side or the other a bit, but hopefully through awareness and, good dialogue that you find yourself back on that line in that connection. And so part of what, to look at is this whole worldview thing. I actually wrote a blog entry years ago. I think you have that link, but about the substance and process of change. And that was basically explored when I'm about to go through a bit around, okay, so you're about to enter therapy or even thinking about becoming a therapist yourself. And here are some questions to ponder when considering what interventions you're going to either engage in or accept or participate in. And so we begin with that worldview paradigm. Like what characterizes human nature? I mean, what do you think? Is it an innately sinful creature that needs to be saved and, purified, through a weird sacrifice? Anyway, it's like, does it need to be, put through some kind of ringer? Is pain of some kind a process for purification and so on? Like, is it, you can get more, philosophical. Are we dualists? Are we naturalists? What is the person's, idea about what the mind is? I mean, there was Daniel Siegel, he's written multiple books. Highly recommend reading his material. But he got started writing in part because he started noticing that despite the fact that all these therapists and people in psych are, supposedly helping out and healing the mind, nobody had a freaking clue what definition they were using about mind. It was like, oh, it's mind. Don't we all just know what we're talking about? Turns out, no, nobody did. And quite often these days, that's still the case. We just kind of use. Actually was at a presentation on emotive, emotion therapy. And it was, and I asked, well, what's the difference, or what's the definition of emotion that you're using? Crickets. Had no clue. It's like, well, don't we just all know what we're talking about? No, there's actually different opinions on how this works, but okay.
We've had an episode about that.
Yeah, you should have listened to that episode with Dr. Ferd. Gabi here. You should watch that.
Should. I mean, yeah.
Put in your
I think I actually have a link, an embedded link to the YouTube on my website. So there's that. So
we are. It's the matrix. It's many layers. It's the matrix of therapy.
There's that. Real quick, the book that I would recommend to start with Daniel Siegel is the oh, I know I have it. Where is it? Oh no. The development of the self. I do remember. But it is, in fact, it just a few years ago, it came out with the second edition that got updated with last decade previous research that he's done in attachment, the nature of relationships, how we develop ourselves through interactive, interactions with others. It's great. We'll say it can be a little technical. So just as a, just caveat to that, there are some others that might be, good just if you don't already have a bit of a background. And I'll think about those and answer that at the end.
Well, and speaking of that too, I think you bring up a good point. For people that may have never done therapy before and aren't really sure what it entails or what it's for, what would you say that maybe people who are in our audience who may be just coming out of a faith tradition or thinking different kinds of ways about it, what kind of reasons might they have to seek out a therapist? What kind of things could they hope to achieve? What kind of things would they want to avoid?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and so, this goes into like, well, what change do you want to see in your life? It's the, there are a lot of techniques around it, but I mean, it's just like, why are you here? Like, what are you hoping to react differently to? What increased flexibility do you want to see happen in connection to perhaps intimate relationships, work, your own emotional life? How do you want to break habits that you've identified as habits of both behavioral and thought that you've recognized finally as going, what, these may have served me before, but I no longer am good with the consequences of them. And that is a perfectly legitimate way of framing it. We learn behaviors in order to address difficulties. They become habits because they work and help us meet our needs, but then context changes, including time, and eventually go, wait a minute, is this really what I want to keep doing? Are the consequences to this really as helpful as perhaps they used to be? Or do I want to change, how this might show up? So that is fundamental to, what I work with people on. I'm coming from a very functional perspective. How does this help you step into who you want to be and address the goals that you have for your life, period. If it's not helping you in doing that, probably a good idea to change, and so on. If it is, well, then let's move on to the next thing. Very practical, very functional. Again, not it's not the perspective necessarily of every therapist out there. So not calling anybody out necessarily, but it's just, here it is. In fact, I think somebody asked like what my approach was. And can go into that later. Actually, I do think I gave another talk on that a while back.
I think you have done another talk. What is this talk now? What number are we on?
19, I think.
Yeah, somewhere
18?
Up there. Yeah.
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
I do kind of want to piggyback off what you're saying though, is why do you think religious structures have such a negative view of healthy mental health, like actually going to professionals? Because they don't, some religions don't discourage people from going to see like their physician for a physical ailment. But so why do you think some religious structures will discourage their congregation from going to see like a mental health professional for something that they're dealing with in the mental emotional range of existence?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And that's the so there's the perception that basically if you've gone through training that therapy, this kind of came out of the 70s, 80s. But if you're a therapist, you are intrinsically part of some, secular, world philosophy that you're going to talk people out of, your religious belief. So oddly enough, it was never true. So yeah. Anyway, yet another one of those pieces where people think they're martyrs and they're actually the ones in charge. So it's anyway. But part of the process there is kind of going, okay, well, it might be perceived that, wait a minute, we don't want you to get a different opinion. We don't want somebody to help you think for yourself. We might want to encourage through, so try to give the benefit of the doubt. Even certain dogmas that are about the intrinsic, sin nature of humanity quite often comes from a genuine belief. And really, all you have to do is turn on the news and you'll more than readily find examples of people being awful. So it's easy to find justification or rationalization for such thinking. Not obviously agreeing with it, it's a whole other thing. But part of what I work through and is to acknowledge that every belief is based on a real need to understand and a commitment to thinking of the world in a consistent fashion. Also another talk I've given. But it's just self-referencing all over the place. Oh, ego.
You can pimp your own shit, David. We allow that on the show. You can pimp your shit.
Yeah. And as one comment noted, some faith-based therapies are based on the idea that all of mental health problems are caused by sin, and if you get right with said deity, that you'll be better. Okay, maybe. And you know what? The thing of it is, sometimes it might even be true in the sense of, this is not an advocacy for this, but it is an interesting, thing around sometimes the perceived problems that one is actively going through will be solved or at least addressed through that kind of recommitment to their social connections and a more consistent view of themselves. If they're going through some serious questions, it's going to encourage anxiety and self-doubt and possibly depression and so on. Nobody here who has ever grew up, in some religious indoctrination came out of it feeling hunky-dory. It was a painful process. And so, and both during it and in leaving it. So it may be the case sometimes where a person recommitting themselves, to fill in the blank may in fact help them feel better. Okay. Do I think that there's a better, more humanistic, way of doing that? Absolutely. Am I going to fault the person as somehow being awful for finding the thing that helps them? No.
Well, I would have to imagine, like, I've heard this from other therapists too, that the goal isn't to, like, as far as like someone's full philosophical, whether atheist or religious, to force them out of a philosophical belief system but like, if you're dealing with like an anxiety disorder, whether you believe in God or not, you still have anxiety. So maybe we should talk about the anxiety and where it's coming from. Right. And if it's caused by religion, then that's a different discussion. But like, my brain just goes into anxiety mode, and I had it when I was religious or not religious. It's just my brain, so.
Well, and speaking of that, David, have you looked into any of the studies or anything that I think I've read a few things that have suggested that, perhaps doing some religious activities, like, for example, praying, could, for some people, be performing a similar function to something like doing meditation or mindfulness activities that you might do in a secular fashion. So it could be kind of performing a therapeutic service, not necessarily because the deity is fixing you, but because you're engaging in some kind of calming, repetitive procedure.
Prayer is in many ways a mindful or mimicry of mindful techniques in meditation. I mean, really, especially if there's no there. What are you still doing? Well, you're reflecting on your own meaning and purpose, and you're the one who is determining the meaning and purpose of what you then believe as being deity's voice. I mean, and this is, so going all over today. This is not where I thought I was going to go with this, but we're having fun. So, one of the things around, coming back to your question around, like, why do we need, as secularists, as people who have either questioning or come out of, which actually, quick caveat to that, secular therapy project and so on, we are not there to deconvert you. We are not there to indoctrinate you into the religion of atheism. Wow, an oxymoron. But it's that is not our purpose. The purpose of the therapy project is to not indoctrinate. It is to give a humanistic space for one's personal reflections. I have worked with many believers, many of which don't even know my own opinion on the subject. They don't. Surprisingly, because obviously they haven't looked me up and seen one of my RfR talks, but who knows? But they don't know. And you know what? Even some of them who do know, they don't care. Because I am not there, nor should nor is any of the other, therapists on the project there for proselytizing to you. We are not going to sit there and engage in street epistemology in the middle of the session. Like, that's not what we're there for. We're there to help you, step into the best version of yourself that you know to be consistent, to live a healthier life than what you perceive yourself doing, period. And so, but part of then coming back to then the why, people who are coming out of, in deep indoctrination, what they're doing is one of the most perniciously, pernicious forms of gaslighting that I've ever really encountered. It took me a while to figure this out, because for the longest time, coming out of religious dogma, I bought into the idea that these ideas that I was given were somehow external to me. So the determination of meaning and purpose and ethics, like, I bought into, even if I didn't agree with it, I bought into the framing, and I hear this a lot, both, from some secular therapists and many, non-believers, is, this like, well, I need to figure out what my ethics are, and I need to figure out like meaning and purpose and so on. And because I have to figure this out now, I was given it by religion. And so now I have to figure this out. Here's the thing. That's bullshit. You do not need to figure anything out per se, at least along those lines, because guess what? You were the one determining it the whole damn time. You were the one that determined and chose and, assessed the ethics of deity. You were the one that assessed and judged the meaning and purpose and whether or not it was legitimate for your life. You were the one doing it all along. And it's the story that you're told that says otherwise.
So ultimately, though, like, because, you're constructed a narrative when you're in a religious structure that, God is guiding you into these certain ideas and certain moral values people hold. Is it difficult for people to go, yeah, I might have been indoctrinated into a system, but ultimately there is some choice involved? Like, because I think that, because we talk about indoctrination a lot, like almost like a brainwashing technique, and we talk about this a lot in the circles that we swim in. But at what point does it become a choice? And where's that line? Because it gets a little fuzzy and weird. I know. Yeah. I'm asking deep questions.
That goes all over. Yeah. I mean, so part of the difficulty here is like, one, I don't believe in free will in a libertarian sense. So there's that. But so, one way of looking at it is, So, one metaphor I use is the drawing picture by numbers. And, many of us did that when we were kids. And you're like, okay, 1 to 2, and I'm connecting the dots, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh my gosh, there's a rabbit there. Like, oh, I finally, and what happens? Like, the image likely by the time you've gotten to like 8 or 10. Like, all right, that's a rabbit. I don't even need to finish this up. I know what this stupid thing is. And so you move on to the next one. What is often happening in the felt perception of choice, the influences that one grows up with, is a kind of connect the dots system where once you have 1, 2, 3, oh wait, never mind, I can see my way all the 10, thank you very much. It's like it's that threshold for habitualized thinking. It's why self-questioning and reflective questioning and humility is so important. It's not just an attitude, it is an active practice. To, oddly enough, it's a active practice that I was initially taught as a Christian. To, what's somebody else remind me, how does that phrase? Something about, deeply dive into or, question one's own, faith or whatever. I mean, it was I forget, Paul or Peter, I forget. But, one of their epistles, like just noting like, no, question this. I was a part of a dispensational group. I was in, mid-Acts. It was very, very narrow field of people, of believers who think this. But, it's this whole notion out of 2 Timothy about rightly dividing the word of truth was a dedication to actively inquiring as to where your Bible came from and what it means. Because if truth comes directly from God, then the pursuit of it should constantly lead you back to it. Like, there it is. It's what I was taught. Obviously, I took it to a place that they didn't appreciate, but but it's a peculiar thing that I was, frankly, a little bizarre. Not everybody grows up in that kind of thinking and group, even within religious circles. But there was. I mean, I took that from there. It was actively told. And so, when we come back to, okay, so at what point is there a choice involved? And part of this goes into, so for instance, like it's similar to feelings of anxiety, depression, going back into, backsliding into old habits around like anger and so on. It's or even sometimes drug use, alcohol use, and so on. You're like, no, I've gone back to something, a behavior I didn't want to do. Part of what's going on is that once you have engaged in something for any length of time and it's become a part of your behavioral toolbox, it never goes away. Like once you have engaged in an activity, that never leaves. Your brain does not forget anything, not in the broad sense of forgetting. We may not be able to consciously recall every last piece of information, but our brains are not forgetting anything outside of damage, to it. So it's there, accessible. What we are doing through, therapy and self, reflection and learning new skills is that the kind of connect the dots that got us to one way of looking at a picture, we're connecting new ones. So instead of a rabbit, we're not going to see, I don't know, a wolverine. Usually we're going to see a horse. You're going to see something different. But sometimes, depending on what is going on in our lives, those dots might get connected back again to that original rabbit fit image. And suddenly we find ourselves going, oh, okay, it's been a long time since I thought that, or, it's a long time since I engaged in that behavior. It is not about you being a failure. It's not about you being anything wrong with you. It's that once the brain learns something, it never forgets. And sometimes it's going to pick that out of the so-called toolbox that it has available because there were enough circumstances and variables in place for it to go, I think that one's going to be helpful here. What we want is to keep building more skills, to build more helpful variables in our life so that we are not reaching for that old habit, that we have plenty of others to flexibly respond with.
Oh, so this kind of makes me think back to one of the poll questions that you were asking about therapy and healing, and one of the answer choices being I'm broken and I need to be fixed. And it sounds like what I'm hearing from you is instead we should be thinking about therapy as a way of developing more tools that we can use. Not that we're broken, but we're adding to our toolbox. Is that accurate?
Hands down. Yeah. It's part of why, I actually provide sometimes a more like psychoeducational coaching, to those who aren't necessarily needing, full therapy. It's more of like, I need somebody to be able to bounce ideas off who have, has studied this ad nauseum times. It's just like, how do we work through that skill building process? And so definitely we'll offer that to people, other countries and other states. But the reason for that is precisely because not everything can be reduced to a syndrome. Not everything can be reduced to or should be reduced to a pathology. Sometimes, contemplating, wait, what am I supposed to do with my life and so on doesn't mean that there's some pathological issue going on with you. It just means you're human. Well, and so it's nice to have a space to be able to bounce ideas off of.
Because this is something I've always advocated for, like when we're talking about mental health, like people, this idea is changing, and I'm glad that it is, that like therapy is for people that have like a major problem going on, and really it's not, because like I have ADHD. There were certain coping skills that I learned that weren't serving me anymore. And like, am I in 100% distress about it? But no, but I was just like, you know what? The tools in my toolbox aren't working anymore. Maybe I need to go develop some new ones. Let me go talk to a therapist that is trained in ADHD and let's have a conversation about it, because I just need more tools. That's all I needed. Like, I wasn't under distress. I was just like, hey, these old habits are starting to prop up and it's not serving me anymore. I need new tools. And I think that when it comes to therapy, like, even if you're just dealing with, like, I need to handle stress better, you can go talk to a therapist that can help you handle stress, find new coping skills. And I think that if we can have more of those conversations, like, you don't have to have, like, yes, I have generalized anxiety disorder. I have it, but I know how to cope with that now. My ADHD, that always needs retweaking. So I have, so we have to have discussions on certain things that, like, I need new coping skills. Help me have new coping skills.
In many ways, the designation of therapist is a kind of, or it should be, a way of going, if you're going to get your oil changed, you're going to go to a designated place for it. You're not going to go, knock on, the random person's door or just grab somebody off the street and, help you out with that if you don't already have the skill for it. So a therapist ideally has gone through the training, and this is years. I mean, understand the designation of a mental health therapist or licensed professional counselor depends on the state. This is years. This is a minimum of a 2 to 3 year master's program on top of the bachelor's, which is 4 years. So now you're looking at 6 to 7. Then it's an internship. Then it's 2 more, sometimes 3 years after graduation of therapy practice that is overseen by another professional. I'm totally blanking on the person designation right now. But so this is a 10-year process. 10 years. You might be able to shorten it to 8 or 9, depending on the program and how many hours you can, put in, but post-graduation. But at minimum, 8 years process here of going through this. So ideally then, the person, it is a way of kind of culling the populace into, okay, if I need to answer some questions concerning relationships, the nature of mind, and how I kind of contemplate some of these things, who am I going to go to? Okay, this person has dedicated that many years to exploring these questions and how to go about, answering them to some degree. So here I am, and that's not even getting into the fact that insurance companies and how all this works. But, but ideally, that's where this is. This is where it's such a problem for many coaching people out there, is because they literally have bumpkus of training when it comes to any of these things. It's extraordinarily problematic. The lack of oversight over how this is being done. So,
well, and could you? I mean, you were about to leave that topic, but I wonder if you could just briefly explain to people, what is the difference if someone's going online and they're thinking, oh, I've never done like any kind of mental health care before, I'm not sure what to look for. Like, what is the difference between the different qualifications or titles that they might see in terms of coach versus mental health therapist or licensed clinical social worker? What do these terms mean?
Life coach is a red flag.
Yeah,
it can be. I mean,
unless you have credentials with your life coach, like if you just say life coach, and I have a bachelor's degree in psychology, I'm like, oh no.
It's like if you're an influencer, don't buy your diet plan.
Yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of therapists who like to become influencers, so that's a problem. But in my admittedly different generational thinking, but I'm
with you. I don't understand it. I'm baffled by it. But
yeah, my Instagram is about my photography.
I'm a Gen Xer, so I'll don't care.
Yeah.
So what are terms that mean something if you're looking for a mental health professional?
By and large, you're going to see largely two designations: mental health therapist or licensed mental health therapist, so LMHC, or you're going to see some version of like licensed professional counselor. Depends on the state. But those are the two largest designations as far as I remember. There might be a couple of variations otherwise, but that's usually, you'll be able to look them up via their NPI number. You'll be able to see what state they are designated or licensed in, and therefore be able to look up their license number. It is public knowledge. You should be able to see, when was this person licensed? How long have they been? When are they, going to be, when does the license, expire? I mean, it is, and that requires, payments, continued education. So I'm licensed in Washington State and South Dakota. I have to, pay, every year, Washington every couple of years, in South Dakota, states do it differently, for that license, and maintain certain amounts, dozens between the 2 hours of continuing education that I have to do every couple, within every couple of years, including then also ethics every couple of years. So this is not just some designation that somebody, just willy-nilly gets. It is a continual process of professional development, which also influences why, some of the cost is there. I mean, let's just face it. I have some questions as to sometimes the amount, but here nor there, whole other conversation. But there's a reason, why they charge what they do, and why, insurance is involved, because this is a at least attempt at legitimizing and finding a path for legitimizing quality health. That's how it works, and it works generally pretty good. And I have my criticisms, obviously, but generally speaking, if you find a designated person who's licensed in your state, you are probably going to find somebody who, by and large, is going to be able to help you out. It's largely true.
And if you go to seculartherapy.org, you can find one who's been vetted to make sure they're only using evidence-based treatments.
So for those people that are moving out of religious structures and they've heard the term counselor, because you'll get preachers and ministers that say that they are counselors, versus what is the difference between like someone that's in their church that is a counselor versus like someone that is like, I have a medical license, like a mental health license counselor, counselor, like what, like how are we going to do the distinction for people that are looking for license. Good mental health?
Honestly, look up their license, and if they tell you, they should be able to provide to you their license number, and you should be able to look them up. If it's an in-person office, most of the time they'll have their license up on a wall, somewhere, or all you have to do is ask. And if you find somebody who's like, why do you need to know that? Leave. So the person's being defensive about giving you their license information. Yeah.
Because my concern is that someone's going to say like spiritual counselor. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And they're going to think that's the same thing, especially people that don't. Those of us that swim in mental health fields know what we're talking about. But for the person that is used to talking to their minister about mental health issues versus someone that actually has gone through the rigor like you have to practice, that's two different things.
Yes. Oh, I am not even going to touch empath. Nope, not going to touch it.
Listen, I'm an empath, David. I've been told I was an empath, okay? I can feel your vibe.
Lots of people are saying it, Helen. Lots of people.
I know. I can feel some annoyance from David when I say the word empath, so I know. I can feel it.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of my pet peeves. So
you little pet peeve.
I know. No, I mean, so yes, be aware, but there are ways of checking in. If a person is, you should be able to look up what their credentials are. You should be able to, one of the things around, say, therapist websites is that every website, almost nobody does this, but technically speaking, legally, you're supposed to have like your generic statement of intent as a therapist, that it should be downloadable. Like you should be able to have your basic, here's my theory, here's my code of ethics that I'm adhering to, and here are your rights as a patient. Like, here it is. They should be able to give that to you anytime. So ask. If they have a problem with that, leave. I mean, it's really like, if anybody, so, because sometimes in the attempt at being more approachable to people, some fully licensed therapists will engage in some different name changes in order to appeal to a particular crowd. All power to you. Like, whatever. But okay. But regardless, you should be able to step in and ask, okay, well, thank you for whatever title you are, but I'm curious about what's your license number, and where did you go to school, and and so on. Like, you should be able to ask that.
So basically, like we've said before on the show in different episodes, you're allowed to interview the person that is going to be your therapist and determine whether they are competent and qualified and a good fit before you just go ahead and start taking their advice.
Absolutely. I offer 20-minute free consults for precisely that purpose. Obviously, if you've heard me on here, you already know I'm awesome. But it's like, if you don't, or if you want to inquire, like, how's this actually going to work in practice? Like, there's a reason for that. And many therapists do offer some kind of free consultation. It is not a substitute for therapy. There is no professional relationship that is established. I'll throw those caveats out. But it is a space for you to be able to, and it shouldn't be the only time you can ask. But it is a place that's provided for you to go, hey, I got some questions. How does this work? What are your credentials? Can I get your license number? Can I look you up? Like, and the person should go, yes, by all means, go on ahead.
Yeah, and so I know we've got to wrap up here in a minute because we do have a lot of questions, but I think this is a really good topic to go over here. If somebody is looking for a new therapist, let's say they go to the Executive Therapy Project or someplace else, and they find a therapist that they're thinking about employing, what questions should they ask when they're trying to determine whether this is going to be a good fit or this is a credible licensed person?
Ask, some basic questions. So maybe 2 or 3. One, ask them what, they believe the relationship is between therapist and client or patient. Ask them, like, how do you think about that relationship? It's going to give you a very big window into how they look at themselves and also the process of therapy. Ask what their psychotherapeutic theory is. Many may come back going, oh, I'm eclectic. I have a pet peeve around that, but it's not necessarily a bad thing, to be fair. Obviously I have my opinions, but they should be able to at least give you a, like, I practice CBT, or I go through, this, and then you can ask the follow-up of, okay, well, what is a standard intervention that you see works with clients? By all means, ask. Those are 3 possible, questions. It gets you into how they view the relationship. It gets you into how they view change. How does change happen? Here's another question. And then it also gets into, like, what are you going to get out of this? Do they believe in homework? Do they believe in doing work outside of therapy? Or do they only believe that real change only happens in the session? Ooh, run away from that one. So yeah, this is definitely ask those kind of, general areas. Yeah.
Okay, good advice. Well, and like I said, we do have a lot of questions that people have asked, but is there anything else that you want to say before we move to Q&A?
So one of the books that I have on my list for this week, I tried to actually put some new ones on there. I know. is from Owen Flanagan, which actually I recommend everything he's written. But his book, The Problem of the Soul, and he mentions in actually his opening is around the project to live morally and meaningfully expresses our most noble aspiration. But this project proceeds inauthentically if it is built on a false picture of the kind of creatures we are. That is why it is so important to be aware of how the therapist, and yourself for that matter, views both your humanity, how change happens, the nature of the relationship you're engaging in, because those things will inform the journey that you are on. They will inform what interventions are going to be both provided, but also understood and taken on. So ask the questions.
Like, I know we talked about this before, but like, you have to kind of treat your therapist like you're going on a date. Like you
but
do,
not actually going on a date.
like a kiki fun time date, but like you're going to be forming a relationship with this person, for a period of time, and there's certain questions you want to vet and ask because you're going to be talking about very vulnerable parts of yourself.
Yep.
And you want to make sure that this person isn't going to put their own biases in, put their own bullshit into the feelings that you have about yourself. So like I always say, like I equate it with like professional dating, like if you need a cancer specialist, I would assume you would ask a lot of questions. So treat it as the same way. You're giving this person your time and your money. So make sure you ask all the correct questions before you enter a relationship with them.
Yep, absolutely. That's why it can be really helpful to, if the person has done writing, has, done interviews. I mean, to look them up and listen to what they have to say on some of the topics. Just take a look. We're all online all the time. Use it.
Yeah, if a therapist is telling you not to Google them, that's a red flag.
Yeah, go away. Yeah.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yeah. Run away.
Yeah.
Run away. So we got questions.
We have a lot of questions, so I want us to be able to address some of those. I think we'll just go through them in the order they came in, and we'll get to as many as we can. And if we don't get to all of them, stick around for the hangout, and we'll get through as many as we can there.
David likes being here.
He's required to be here.
Yeah. He is required to be here. I mean, he is an RfR
kidnapped
volunteer,
him.
so
yeah.
I get paid in Monopoly money.
Yes,
so.
we will dock your pay if you leave.
Cabal money we're making, David. All the money.
Got a picture of Carl Sagan on it.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
I have a Carl Sagan candle that I worship and light to his Cosmos Magistry.
Ooh, I like that.
Cosmos Magistry. Right. I'm gonna coin that.
Coin that one. Yes. Okay. Question 1. Okay. First question is, when is personal assessment from a therapist appropriate? For example, if a therapist feels that monogamy is the most stable type of relationship and the client says they were discussing polyamory as an option with their spouse, is it okay, for example, for the therapist to say, that would make me feel insecure if I was your spouse?
Cool. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm cringing. I
had a hard time reading that without making it sound silly.
Glenn is like, yeah, I have an opinion.
So, I mean, I will say there is a distinction, at least in my mind, between having assessments and giving specific advice. I will say that the line between them can be very, very small, if not non-existent. So there is, clinical judgment that is going to be made. So, one thing to keep in mind with that is the offered opinion relating to what you were actually talking about, and did you ask for it? If they are just simply giving it without any caveats. So anytime that I, give a slightly more, try not to do too much in the way of assessing, but with that, or offer a bit of a worldview thing, it is always done with the caveat given of this is view here, and by all means challenge, and this is it's often will get framed in the I wonder if or perhaps the other person might be thinking this. I could be wrong. I don't know. I use a lot of self kind of not deprecating, but definitely a kind of like, I can be wrong. Absolutely. I do not know this other person we're talking about. So this is pure like imaginative conjecture. So here it is. But yeah, if you haven't asked for it, if it's not pertinent to the topic at hand, if it comes across as a judgment that particularly you didn't ask, yeah, not appropriate at all. If you're going to touch on, one thing there to branch off from that a little bit is that if you're going to touch on an issue that is outside of perceived mainstream, I actually think some form of polyamory is a lot more mainstream than people generally think, but at least perceived mainstream. Ask ahead of time what their views on it might be. Now, there's actually there's some workbooks actually that's on, I think it might come out like the 10 things that therapists need to know when working with polyamory couples. Something like something, I have it somewhere. I'll have to look it up. But it actually is a full-on question around that. And it's something that people can get specifically trained. If you're going into, for instance, if you're going into specifically issues around sexuality, that look for qualifications of whether or not they have been they've gotten designated as a certified sex therapist through the American Association for Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, AASECT. You can even look them up. They've got a whole list. There's another list for place you can look up and go by state and see whether or not. But they have gone through rigorous training. It is some pretty, it's extensive. I will say that, and they do some really good work there. A lot of really good therapists out there that I know of.
Like even that, even I'm not a therapist, but even that one comment, I'd be like, how do you think your spouse would feel about that? That would be my first question. You know your spouse better than I do. Tell me how you would think this is going to go. That's just a basic question. You don't even need to be a therapist to ask that question.
I know the story that was just shared in the chat before, and it still pisses me the hell off that you had to deal with that. So that really that was beyond the pale of ethics. Wow, just ridiculous.
Yikes.
Yes. Next question.
Next question.
Anyway, let's move on from now talking about polyamory and our problems with biases. So the next one is somebody asked, I'm curious about overcoming a specific aspect of personal religious trauma, namely the being broken and unworthy of love, only deserving of punishment. Do you have any books, TED Talks, personal exercises, etc. to recommend?
Is this where
I know. It was a lot, man.
Own presentations before. I mean, really,
go watch this talk.
I've actually touched on that specifically, both in RfR and in the I'm totally blanking now. The psychotherapist conference. And so if you look me up on YouTube, it's there. I'll
find it. I'll go to the YouTubes and put it in the link. I will ask the all-knowing God Google.
There you go. So in working through some of that, one highly recommend is Morality for Humans by Mark Johnson. It's really, really good for because effectively the question has to do with how you consider yourself in an ethical fashion. I mean, ethics here, what I'm meaning by that is ethics is how is the structure through which we interact with others. Like anytime you are engaging in some behavior with others, you're engaging in ethics. You're answering that question, you're exploring it to varying degrees of self-awareness, but you're still doing it. Anytime you engage with somebody else, it's ethics. So having an idea around a naturalistic form of ethics, which is what Johnson's book goes into, it's one of the best ones I've seen so far. It can be extraordinarily helpful. Owen Flanagan has one called The Geography of Morals. It's a little more higher end philosophy, just as a caveat. It's excellent, but it's, still that. Some other ones around. Yeah, I mean, there's so many, but anything that's going to go through like a secular or naturalistic ethics. I know, what's his name, physicist, explored one. Sean Carroll, the big question, something like that. I think that's what it is. Excellent. Like he goes through what he refers to as a poetic naturalism that is just delightful to read. It's really, really well done. And even if you don't agree with 100%, it's well worth contemplating and pondering for a bit. It's a really nice question. It's also a fantastic physics book without the math. So yeah, have fun with that.
I wish I had the attention span for books, because everybody's always recommending books, and I'm like, wow, that sounds really fascinating reading. And then my ADHD brain goes like, "Helen, we're not gonna read that, Helen. Just let it go." And I'm like, fair brain, fair.
Audio, yeah.
Yeah. I like audiobooks I can put on the background when I work, or I like listening to interviews of people that have written books and talk about their book, so I can just get the Cliff Notes version, and that's awesome for me.
Mm-hmm.
That's how my brain works, and I own that and accept that about myself. Doesn't make me
there you go.
any better or any worse than anybody else. I just know myself, and knowing your limitations is a strength.
Yeah, that's right. And that leads us to the next question, which I think is a great one. With what worldview do you yourself approach therapy?
So I work from naturalistic ethics. I'm a physicalist when it comes to ontology, metaphysics. So there is one substance. I am not a dualist, not even a functional dualist. I could really go into all of this. Stick around for the Q&A after. But it's so very much a naturalistic philosopher that operates from that kind of interactive and and intersectional. And I'm using that term in the form of psych, in the form of basically it's contextualism. I mean, it's a recognition that we are all many different identities and ways of thinking about ourselves. And all of those are tied to the varying relationships that we are involved with, whether with ourselves and the various versions of what we think of ourselves, to geography, to history, and so on. And then from a psychotherapeutic perspective, I draw a lot from acceptance commitment therapy, which is part of the behaviorist school, and as well, there's a lot. Yeah, you've been going with a lot of that. But yeah, Mark Johnson and George Lakoff, their notion around the cognitive metaphor theory is another piece. You can start Googling a lot of these things. But yeah, I operate from it's pretty much that in a nutshell. So.
Excellent. Okay. Well, and yeah, we'll have more time in the Hangout to dive deeper if anyone wants to. But I think maybe we have time for one more question. Helen, do you want to hit
I'll
one
ask the
last
next one that we're in order. And then for those all of you that are going to be here for the Hangout, you can ask David the question that we're not going to get to, or new questions. We might have more. But wait, there's more. It's going to come.
Wait, there's more.
There is. You'll become 30% cooler if you come to the Hangout. So
okay,
I'm going to ask this last question. Are there some questions that cannot be answered in the universe of the mind? I've heard a lot of people lately concerning issues of gender and sexuality talk about coming to a place of, I'm tired of trying to figure out where I fit in the definitions. So I'm going to use my own individual box. I'm wondering if this is just a flux inherent in being human. I personally have difficulty knowing the difference between my identity and just what I desire. That's a deep question.
It is. Please hang out with the Q&A because there's a lot that we can have a lot of fun with that. I actually gave a talk on this. The idea that you are ever tied and defined wholly by one identity is colossally absurd. You are many, many, many things, and from different perspectives, and all of which is going to inform and create greater flexibility in how you see yourself. So other than for the purposes of filling out surveys, boxes are not anything we keep ourselves in. So if you are feeling constrained by it, either by society in general or a particular group that's asking you to, stick with some structure there, might be a good time to seek elsewhere and to, ponder, wait a minute, maybe I'm bigger than this narrow identity, would have me think. And you know what? You are. You're more than that. You should have fun exploring it.
Well, I like that. That is a good note to end on. So I think we will wrap up there. And let's get ready to go to the Hangout. So if you have more to discuss on that topic or another one, or if you asked a question and we didn't get to it yet, stick around for the Hangout and we'll talk about it there. And meanwhile, don't forget, we'll be back again next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Anybody who's under like 50 doesn't know what I'm talking about, but that's okay.
I'm under 50 and I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. Okay? I am too, but I'm exaggerating a little bit, but not that much. But
don't age us older than what we are. God.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Not that there's anything wrong with being mature. So, and in the meantime, if you want to catch up on more episodes of RfRx, you can find us on our YouTube channel, which I'm dropping in the link. And don't forget to email us if you have questions or ideas for future shows that you would like to see at rfrx@recoveringfromreligion.org. And you can also find the audio version of all of our shows wherever you get your podcasts. And I'm going to drop the links for our blog and our podcast as well. And while I do that, Helen, do you want to mention where people can find us on social media?
Okay, so I know all of you wonderful people that are here are internet savvy. So I know that you want to go to the Facebook where we have our main page, which the Recovering from Religion page on the social media. And we also have a support groups project that is also on the Facebook. So you want to go to that. You want to go to Twitter. You want to go to Instagram, and you want to go to TikTok, because that's where you can find what's going on in the Recovering from Religion community, events we have coming up, support groups, all types of stuff that's going on with the Recovering from Religion. I hear that certain volunteers do little short things on the TikToks and the Instagrams that you can check out. So please go check those things out to stay current. And now we're going to do the feedback poll. So Car's going to launch that, and I'm going to read it in the way that it's not intended to be read, because it's me, and that's why, and it's me. So, was this program relevant to me? 1 to 5. Not relevant at all, or as I like to say, don't know, don't care. 2 to 5. This was very relevant to me, and it resonated with me on a deep level. So that's number 5. And then 2 to 4 is like, somewhere in here. So moving on. Speaker was clear and understandable. 1, banana phone, could not understand at all. 2 to 5, clear, understandable, podcast worthy, awesome. 2 to 4, maybe. Number 3, I will attend future programs like this. 1, screw y'all, you're terrible, I'm not coming back. 1. 5, yes, amazing, I want to be 20% cooler. Number 5. 2 to 4, somewhere in here. How did you find RfRx tonight? Okay, so first one is through our awesome RfR online community on Slack. Number 2 on Meetup. Number 3 on the Facebook, the Twitter, or the Instagrams on your social media networks. Number 4 on our Discord, where I hang out, where you are automatically 20% cooler. On the Recovering from Religion website, which one makes you 30% cooler, or other. So I guess that you just got this download from your alien overlord that told you to be here. So it's one of those things. So now, Cara, that I read the exit poll in my own unique way, let's move on to the next portion. What are we doing next, Cara?
Yes, and I appreciate the way you read it. And next, I would like to bring on the fantastic and amazing Dr. Darrel Ray, who is going to wrap us up for the evening before we go to the hangout.
Hey, thank you, Cara, and thank you, David, for another great talk. I liked all about it. One thing always sticks out with me is the notion of a toolbox, and I think you hit that really, really well. I think therapy, if it does nothing else, it gives you new tools. And oftentimes, like Helen said, it's that the old tools aren't working. We need something else. And a therapist with all that training you described, years of training, I know as I was going through, I was picking up all sorts of little tidbits and tools and ideas and techniques. And a good therapist kind of puts all those in their toolbox, and at strategic times may suggest something or teach something or recommend that somebody learn something. I mean, it's not the primary way therapy goes, but I think you and I are on the same page about that in many ways. Just why do we spend 10 years learning to do all this? We must have something in our brain, but that brain, my brain, as a therapist, has to match in some congruent way with the client, as we're working together. Anyway, great idea. I also use the map metaphor, David, that we all have maps, but sometimes our maps are outdated, or our maps are misrepresenting the real world out there. And if we can update our maps, I mean, I got a map of my home state in 1936. I don't think I could use that map to get anywhere, or I could, but I'd probably get lost. So it's like Google Maps does. It updates almost by the second. There's always updates going on. Well, if you're raised in a church and it says there's only one map and you have to follow this map, it kind of goes along with the box metaphor, then your map is really outdated. When you left church, you still had a 1950s map, or you had a 2,000-year-old map in some cases. So anyway, that's just my pet peeve. But moving on to Recovering from Religion, thank you for joining us tonight. If you would like to help us produce more of these kinds of programs, give more of these kinds of services, we would really appreciate you going to the Recovering from Religion donate button and hitting the button, give a one-time donation or monthly donations. We really appreciate that kind of support, and it helps us grow. It helps us really increase our influence. I'm here to tell you, we now have over 400 volunteers who are actively doing something. They may be working on our website, or they may be running a group out of Sydney, Australia, or they may be running the RfR podcast like Helen and Kara are today. But all those volunteers are doing it for the high pay we give them. You're getting the big bucks, aren't you, Kara?
Atheist bounty.
Oh yeah, I am getting rich.
Okay,
I am so rich. I'm like, it's raining in pennies.
I think I bought all these books in this free Zoom background.
I saw that. I saw that. And someday you'll get to be paid as much as we pay David Teachout. So there you go.